at exactly 6:31 p.m. Washington time, 90 minutes before the expiration of the ultimatum, we discussed yesterday in this briefing. The one that was supposed to, in the words of the American president himself, send Iran back to the Stone Age in 4 hours. A message was posted on the Truth Social network. 6 paragraphs, 1 signature, and 1 sentence that changes everything. I agree to suspend the bombing and attacks against Iran for a period of 2 weeks. In less than 2 hours, the trajectory of the war in the Middle East had just been reversed. By whom? At what price? And most importantly, will the ceasefire hold? That is the entire focus of this briefing. Before we get into the facts, one word and an important one. Yesterday, we published on this channel the complete analysis of the ultimatum issued by Donald Trump, a briefing produced after 48 hours of verification work in a climate where every minute counted. In less than 24 hours, that video crossed 140,000 views, generated more than 13,500 hours of watch time, and brought 2,100 new people into this community. I want to take a second to measure what that represents. 13,500 hours of watch time. That is the equivalent of more than a year and a half of cumulative time that you, French speakers from around the world, chose to give us on a single subject, on a single video, in less than 1 day. Massive. And that is not just a number, it is a responsibility, because it means that somewhere out there is a demand for verified, sourced information presented without an agenda or a narrative to defend. This briefing exists to meet that demand, and you just confirm that demand with a force that commits us. Thank you sincerely. Now we work, because the developments of the last 6 hours are, without exaggeration, among the most significant since the beginning of this conflict. Let us pick up the thread. Tuesday, April 7th, 2026. Ultimatum set for 8 p.m. Washington time. At 6:31 p.m., 90 minutes before expiration, Donald Trump posts the following message on Truth Social. I quote in the English version as relayed by major international outlets. Following discussions with Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir of Pakistan, during which they asked me to suspend the military intervention planned for this evening against Iran, and provided that the Islamic Republic of Iran agrees to the total, immediate, and secure opening of the Strait of Hormuz, I agree to suspend the bombing and attacks against Iran for a period of 2 weeks. And he adds in the same message, this will be a bilateral ceasefire. The reason is that we have already achieved and exceeded all military objectives, and are very advanced in a definitive agreement concerning long-term peace with Iran and peace in the Middle East. We have received a 10-point proposal from Iran and consider it a viable basis for negotiation. These sentences matter for a reason that deserves careful attention. Just the night before, on Monday evening, that same president had described an Iranian proposal on camera as, and I quote, not sufficient. By Tuesday at 6:31 p.m., that same proposal had become a viable basis for negotiation. Between the two moments, something happened, and that something chose to carry a name, a flag, and 2 signatures. The mediator behind this diplomatic breakthrough is Islamabad, more specifically 2 men, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir, the highest-ranking officer in the Pakistani military and a central figure in the country's security apparatus. Here is the timeline as reconstructed by Axios, CBS News, NBC News, and Agence France Presse. Tuesday afternoon in Washington, just hours before the ultimatum expired, Shehbaz Sharif published a message on X. He publicly called on Donald Trump to extend his deadline by 2 weeks, and I quote, to let diplomacy run its course. In the same message, he addressed Iranian leaders, whom he called on to agree to open the Strait of Hormuz during those 2 weeks as a gesture of good faith. It was a perfectly calibrated move. Sharif asked each side for a symmetrical gesture, one that each could present as a diplomatic success. A few hours later, as the window was closing, Sharif and Field Marshal Munir made direct contact with Donald Trump. According to CBS News, Trump then spoke by phone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu before finalizing the agreement. Pakistan's role in this file is far from incidental. Islamabad has spent years cultivating a pragmatic relationship with both Washington and Tehran, and that dual trust makes it, in this crisis, the only actor capable of speaking without filters to both capitals. It is that position of balance that produced a result on Tuesday evening. But a mediation is nothing without validation from the other side. And this is where things get interesting, because the Iranian response, as it was formulated overnight, is more complex and more calculated than the simple acceptance that many headlines suggested. Iranian Foreign Minister Sayed Abbas Araghchi published an official statement on X, picked up in full by major international agencies. He expressed, and I quote, gratitude and appreciation to the dear brothers, Prime Minister Sharif, and Field Marshal Munir for their tireless efforts. Then came the formal commitment on behalf of Iran's Supreme National Security Council. If attacks against Iran cease, our powerful armed forces will end their defensive operations. For 2 weeks, safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz will be possible through coordination with Iranian armed forces and taking into account technical constraints. Note every word. Through coordination with Iranian armed forces and taking into account technical constraints. These are not stylistic formulas. They are diplomatic locks. Tehran announces a reopening, yes, but under its control, at its own pace and according to its own technical conditions. That is precisely what the Supreme National Security Council spelled out in a second statement published minutes later. This does not mean the end of the war. Iran will only accept a cessation of hostilities once negotiations have produced results. And the sentence that should by itself be keeping foreign ministries up tonight. Our fingers remain on the trigger, and at the slightest mistake made by the enemy, they will retaliate with full force. One moment before we get into the content of the 10-point plan and Israel's position, because that is where things really become dense. If you find that this verification work, this refusal to oversimplify, this commitment to nuance matters, then subscribe. It is free, it takes 3 seconds, and it is what allows this briefing to continue existing, publishing, and serving you sourced information rather than clickbait headlines. To the 2,100 people who joined us in 24 hours, thank you. To those still hesitating, now is the moment. At the heart of this agreement and of what will be negotiated in Islamabad in the coming days is what is now being called the Iranian 10-point plan. Donald Trump described it as a viable basis for negotiation. It is exactly the same proposal that just the day before, his administration was describing as maximalist. What does it actually contain? According to elements reported by CNBC, ABC News, Reuters, and semi-official Iranian media, the Iranian 10-point plan includes notably the withdrawal of American combat forces from all regional bases, meaning Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and the Gulf. The lifting of all primary and secondary sanctions that have been hitting the Iranian economy for years, the lifting of IAEA Board of Governors resolutions, and relevant UN Security Council resolutions. The release of all frozen Iranian assets abroad, full payment of war damages sustained by Iran since the start of the conflict on February 28th. Acceptance of Iran's uranium enrichment program, which would constitute, if confirmed, a spectacular reversal of the historical American position. A non-aggression commitment. And finally, the establishment of a secure transit protocol for the Strait of Hormuz under Iranian control within the agreed framework. To this Iranian 10-point proposal, the American side has responded with a 15-point proposal whose content has not yet been made public. It is in fact Iran's Supreme National Security Council that confirmed its existence in its official statement. 15 points against 10. That is the skeleton of what will be negotiated in Islamabad starting Friday. And then there is Israel, and this is where, as is often the case in this war, things get complicated. According to a statement from Prime Minister Netanyahu's office relayed by CBS News, France Info, and the international press, Israel supports the American decision to suspend strikes against Iran for 2 weeks. On the condition, the statement specifies that Tehran immediately reopens the Strait of Hormuz and ends all attacks against the United States, Israel, and countries in the region. Up to that point, the positions are aligned, but Netanyahu's office added a clarification that changes everything. The ceasefire, the statement says, does not include Lebanon. Yet, just hours earlier, Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif had formally declared on X, and I quote the official translation picked up by major international media, that the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America, as well as their allies, have agreed to an immediate ceasefire everywhere, including Lebanon and elsewhere, with immediate effect. Sharif and Netanyahu are therefore saying two opposite things. This contradiction is not a detail. Israel is maintaining its operations against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, where the official death toll, according to the Lebanese Ministry of Health, now exceeds 1,500. And it is precisely that area, southern Lebanon, that has been for months one of the main fronts of the regional conflict. Concretely, if you are following this file, keep in mind that this ceasefire in practice is partial. It freezes the direct American-Iranian theater and the question of the Strait of Hormuz. It does not freeze the Israeli-Lebanese theater. And the fragility of the whole arrangement comes from exactly that gap. Within minutes of the ceasefire announcement, missile alerts sounded in Israel and the United Arab Emirates, and an Israeli strike hit southern Lebanon. The night began exactly as Iran had promised. Fingers on the trigger. While diplomats were drafting their statements, financial markets voted in real time, and the result was spectacular. According to data reported by CNBC, France Info, and AFP, in the minutes following Trump's announcement, crude oil prices dropped by as much as 16 to 18%, falling below the symbolic threshold of $100 per barrel for the first time since the start of the conflict.